House That Jack Built is written and directed by the infamous, reactionary, shocking, artistically ambitious filmmaker that goes by the name of Lars von Trier. To be honest, the only von Trier film that I've seen up until this point is Dancer in the Dark, which is that kind of dark Bjork musical thing, and I thought that movie was fine. But even though I've only seen one of his films, I'm very familiar with what kind of filmmaker this guy is. Films like Dogville, Antichrist, Melancholia, Nymphomaniac 1 and 2, like, I've heard pretty much, not all of his films, but I'm pretty familiar with this guy's filmography in the sense that I've heard about almost every film that this guy's ever made, and nearly all of them are pretty divisive. And walking out of The House That Jack Built, I am 100% certain that this is going to be maybe one of his most divisive films, because everybody that I've talked to says they either really love it, or they just think it's dumb, pretentious schlock. And if you want my personal opinion, I really liked it a lot. That being said, everybody that's calling this film really pretentious, it's not like they're wrong. This is an incredibly self-indulgent film. Probably one of the most self-indulgent films that I've personally ever seen. But the thing about it is that it's incredibly self-aware and it's consistent from start to finish, which is something that I really liked about this film. Throughout its entire film, it really utilized fourth wall breaking in a pretty clever way, if you ask me, because again, a film that's this self-aware and this level of self-indulgence, I think it just makes sense, and it's more kind of an air breather for the audience to just be like, okay, I get what's going on here, I understand what you're doing. And yes, von Trier, through this method, makes this film incredibly preachy throughout this entire runtime, and I think that's something that is what is dividing everybody on this film, because this film is insanely preachy. Because not only are you following Matt Dillon, who is playing this ruthless serial killer, which, by the way, gives a pretty damn good performance if you ask me. And through Jack's mind is the foundation that the director chose to really kind of have this philosophical discussion about himself, about art, about morality, about God. And I found a lot of those segments rather thought-provoking and interesting. And it's also relevant to the topic at hand, and is very consistent with that structure throughout the entire film. And at first, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be all that into this. But as it went along, I was really liking the way it built up certain things. And I was really, again, I think the subject matter was just really interesting to me. I think anybody who is really fascinated by these philosophical subjects like art, morals, God, nature, all this stuff, I think you will walk out of this movie somewhat satisfied. But if those topics don't really pique your interest that much, you might walk away from this film just calling it pretentious bullshit and not being entertained by it, because it is a long movie. It's almost 3 hours long, but to be quite honest, this film did not feel long to me at all. This film's runtime just completely flew by. There was not really a moment where I was sitting in this film like, oh, I'm so bored, please keep it moving. Even the segments where, again, it gets kind of preachy, it's quite self-indulgent, but it's so aware of itself that how can I really fault it all that much? Because it's there plain as day from the very beginning what this film is going to be. There's no surprise what this film starts doing. And some people are just going to chalk it up to saying, well, this is just Lars von Trier just jerking off all over himself, and this is just him glorifying himself, and he's only caring about himself with this film, and he just cares about talking about himself. But I really didn't see it that way. I mean, sure, a lot of the aspects in terms of theme are probably regarding him and what he thinks about certain things. But regardless of this film being, again, insanely preachy, it has a lot of different sub-themes that really kind of keep your mind at work. Keep in mind, I drove 2 hours to go see this film, so I was really hoping it would be worthwhile. And when my girlfriend and I walked out, we took a 2-hour drive back home, and we talked about it the entire time. I mean, we literally talked about this film for 2 hours straight with barely any pauses in between discussion. So the fact that the film was able to do that to us, I have to give it loads of credit, because like I was saying, even if it's preachy, this film gives you a lot to digest and a lot to talk about. And I didn't see this film as the director just trying to glorify himself and his ideas. I saw this just as him wanting to see what other people thought about himself and his ideas. He's not saying, oh, my ideas are godly and everybody who's watching this movie should just agree with everything I'm saying, because this film isn't preachy in the sense that it always just tells you what to believe. Sure, there's times where you could extrapolate some of that, but most of the stuff was just raising, unanswered philosophical questions the entire film. And on top of that, the sequences that we get to see where Jack goes through some of these murders, some of it was filmed, one, hilariously. The first kill that he does was just so darkly hilarious, and it was executed in such a comedic way. A lot of people in my theater were laughing a lot during this movie. I wasn't laughing as much as them. I was laughing a little bit, but I didn't find this movie as funny as they did. But this movie is quite funny at times, and that was something that I didn't really see coming going into this film. But on top of that, beyond the comedy, there are parts in this film that are just like really morbid and shocking. And that's not a surprise to anybody who is used to Von Trier's filmmaking, but this film does give you some of that Von Trier just over the top violence. But in the sense with this film, I feel like pretty much all of it had some sort of purpose, whether it's trying to really dissect more of a theme or related to the metaphors that he kind of preaches about, in between of these murders. But there were quite a bit of people in my theater that weren't fans of this film. I could just tell by a lot of their reactions that they weren't really into it. Out of all the odds, the dude that sat right next to me, there was one particular scene, like during the second act of the film, involving a blonde-haired woman. And once that scene hit its peak, the dude next to me, out of all the odds, was just like, nope, I'm done. I'm not doing it. Nope, I'm not doing it. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, why did you come to this film? Because this is the one showing of the director's cut of this film, and most people that are here should be somewhat aware of the director's material. So it's like, why? And it's funny because there's something, in my opinion, much more morbid and gruesome that happens before that he didn't walk out for, but anyway. And the third act of this film, and I guess by third act I mean like the last 20 to 25 minutes or so, goes to a place that I'm sure most people are going to freak out about and not like at all. But with this film, you just kind of have to roll with it. Like, if you just don't roll with what it's trying to do, and you're just expecting something for yourself, then you're not going to like this film. But if you just roll with it and really just be on board with what this director is trying to do, then I think you'll have a good time with it. But anyway, the third act goes to a place, and it goes pretty far down this place. And by the end of it, I also enjoyed that too. For me, it had a really nice, creative, artsy touch to it. I was actually thinking about analyzing just like the last 30 minutes of this film, because most of the film was pretty straightforward, and the ending gives you a little more something visually stunning to kind of chew on. And I thought just the road that it went down and what it tried to do at the end, it really kind of tied everything up thematically, especially for Jack, his character played by Matt Dillon. I think it really kind of tied everything up in a really ambiguous way, but at the same time not very ambiguous. Like, it's straightforward, but at the same time it's not straightforward. And I don't really know how to really describe that in any better way than that. And I also have heard complaints that people think that this film is misogynistic. And sure, there are some lines that come out of Jack's mouth that are clearly misogynistic, but, I don't see that as Von Trier saying, this is what I believe, so believe it now, because I'm a dictator of your mind, and this is what you gotta believe. Even though, yes, I do understand that this is a very self-indulgent film, and this is, I've heard a lot of people argue that Matt Dillon's character is Von Trier himself, and that's fine, but I don't think every piece of dialogue in this film is him telling you this is what I believe personally. But either way, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was definitely worth my time. I was surprised at how consistently engaged I was throughout this entire film. One thing that kind of took me a while to get used to was just its directing style, because the cinematography is just, a lot of it's really up close. And kind of like the previous Von Trier film that I saw called Dancer in the Dark, it has a lot of cuts in between takes for what seems at first to be really no reason, but I guess as the film goes along, it does seem to have some sort of purpose in terms of how it wants to tell its narrative. But just saying, fair warning, this film's approach in terms of style is a little weird and can be kind of nauseating for some, especially their sequences where the camera is just doing this 360 turn for what seems like forever. But I personally thought that This was an incredibly thought-provoking film, and I really do appreciate filmmakers that don't give a shit about what anybody's gonna think, and they just want to make something for themselves. Yeah, it's self-indulged, I get it, but it's just awesome to see films that are more original like this, and I came out of the film really liking it. So I'm going to give The House That Jack Built, the director's cut, an 8 out of 10. And one thematic aspect of this film that was explored that I thoroughly enjoyed was the randomness of the universe and how, people tend, when they have good fortune, they tend to praise whatever god they believe in, but no one ever really talks about when horrible serial killer people like Jack have tons of good fortune just bestowed upon him. And with that, this film decides to dive deep with nature. Is there beauty in death? Is art on its own narcissistic? Again, if you really just enjoy these topics and you find them thought-provoking and interesting, I think you'll be somewhat satisfied with it. But if not, then I really don't know. And fair warning, this is a very self-indulgent movie. I'd stray a word from the word pretentious because I feel like that word just comes with way too much subjective baggage that I don't even want to get into. So I don't want to call it pretentious because that just kind of assumes that there's something wrong with it. But art in itself is kind of pretentious by nature, so that's blech. But this film does take the level of self-indulgence to a pretty damn high degree, so if you're not prepared for that and you don't want that, then you're just not gonna like this movie. And since I saw the director's cut, I really am not gonna have any idea what's different between this and the R-rated version when it comes out sometime in December. I might check out the R-rated version in December just so I can find out what was different about it. I think I have an idea of what scenes they'll probably edit out and chop up, but I really don't know. Maybe it's also the third act. Maybe the R-rated version has something different where it goes down, but I don't know. So anyway, thank you so much for hearing what I had to say about The House That Jack Built. If you really liked what I had to say, please give it a thumbs up and share it amongst your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be updated on more film-related content.